Welcome back, YouTube, to another episode of Our Topic. Would you believe me if I told you were under attack? Would you believe me if I told you porn was actually a strategy of war?
We are talking about psychological warfare. We are talking about psychological warfare of the most wicked kind. It is so wicked, in fact, there's only one category you could possibly put in, and that is diabolical. And I'm not exaggerating. This sin actually has a name. It's called diabolic scandal. Because the one who commits this sin are actually attacking their brothers in the same way that we are attacked by devils.
Pornography would be the depiction of erotic behavior in pictures, writing material that depicts erotic behavior, and it's intended to cause sexual arousement. So of course, like any other show, I want to find out how porn began. That brings me all the way back to 1748, where we see a John Cleland who wrote the first original English prose pornography. And first to use it in the novel form in England, it was titled Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure. It was considered one of the most banned and prosecuted books in history. They actually charged the authors for corrupting the king's men.
Pornography is a visual representation of sexuality. It distorts the individual's concept of nature of conjugal relation. And what that means is something that is natural, that God gave a man and a woman in a natural setting of love. Pornography will distort it and make what was supposed to be out of love, instead of people operating out of love, pornography will cause a person to operate out of lust. Now, the problem with that is that lust reduces you to the base form, like an animal. Animals don't think, they move by instinct.
This novel was published back in 1748 by Ralph and Fenton Griffiths. Of course, they were brothers. It was published in two parts now. November 1748 was the first part. The second part was released February 1749. Now, about a year after the first release, Cleland and Ralph go to jail for corrupting the king's subjects. Here is where Cleland actually renounces the book, but the book continues to circulate and it reaches the underground market, and by 1821 it hits the US. Here, a court in Massachusetts basically outlaws the book and convicts a publisher by the name of Peter Holmes for printing this novel. This was actually known as the first obscenity case. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court wrote that Peter was a scandalous and evil-disposed person who had contrived to debauch and corrupt the citizens of Massachusetts and to raise and create in their minds inordinate and lustful desires.
The Victorians really are worried that if people were exposed privately to sexually explicit imagery, this would actually disturb the person who was consuming these images. And I suppose the ultimate fear was that they would resort to masturbation. And having resorted to this, they would become addicted. They would want to consume more and more and more and more, and therefore they would become sort of constant masturbators. The ultimate fear being that in losing this sort of sacred seed, men would become enfeebled, they would become effeminized, and they would degenerate.
Well, we'll just tell your mother that we ate it all.
Hosea chapter 5 verse 4. They will not frame their doings to turn unto their God, for the spirit of whoredoms is in the midst of them, and they have not known the Lord. The spirit of whoredoms? How did the spirit of whoredoms get there? Leviticus 19:29. Do not prostitute thy daughter to be a whore, lest the land fall to whoredom and the land become full of wickedness.
The Jews make up only 2% of the American population. They have been prominent in pornography. Now, Abrams shows how the corruption and debasement of Gentiles and Christian morality is an important part of their motivation for intentionally infecting the Christian and Gentile community with pornography.
Sigmund was born 1856 to a Galatian Jewish couple. Now, Sigmund started what was actually known as a psychoanalytic movement, and by 1906 it had 17 members who identified without a doubt as Jewish, making psychoanalysis a reputation as a Jewish science. Sigmund Freud introduced to the entire Western world his psychoanalysis, which was largely viewed as an unproven system of thought. Psychoanalysis began to dominate American culture for over 50 years. The term started around 1896. Now, most importantly, psychoanalysis began to replace the American foundation of the soul. New understandings of the psyche began to tangle themselves into Christianity. I quoted this to be a redefining of psychology revolution.
In Colossians 2:8, it says, "Beware lest any man spoil you through the philosophy of vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ." Now, I must tell you that this is exactly where we're at. We've taken up the philosophies of these guys who hate religion, and we're using it to counsel people today.
Before this, reason and instinct were sound. Once reason lost its harmony in the Jewish psychology, a wave of sexual instinct plagued mankind. In short, Sigmund Freud believed everyone was sexually repressed and that everyone should satisfy their sexual desires for happiness. This was found by Freud using a psychodynamic therapy, which used techniques of treatment like free association.
Free association. A patient relaxes on a couch and speaks his or her stream of arising thoughts out loud. He or she speaks an arising inner dialogue aloud. Listening closely, Dr. Freud excavated the historical roots of his patient's emotional symptoms and/or complaints.
Examination of resistancy.
Ego defense mechanisms, Sigmund Freud. With a negative view of humans, Sigmund Freud believed people are inherently selfish, impulsive, and irrational. That behavior is a result of unconscious processes, the biological instinctual needs and drives, both determined by sex and influenced by psychosexual states.
Dream interpretation.
Freud argued that dreams are underlying thoughts.
Dr. Freud excavated the historical roots of his patient's emotional symptoms and/or complaints.
Examination of resistancy.
Ego defense mechanisms, Sigmund Freud. With a negative view of humans, Sigmund Freud believed people are inherently selfish, impulsive, and irrational. That behavior is a result of unconscious processes, the biological instinctual needs and drives, both determined by sex and influenced by psychosexual states.
Dream interpretation.
Freud argued that dreams are underlying thoughts and memories, the general psychic undercurrents of our lives trying to make themselves known. He believed that asking patients to talk about their dreams and then interpreting the symbols that they discuss was the key to curing patients of their psychological ailments.
And transference.
Transference is one of the most important and intriguing concepts in psychology. It refers to the unconscious redirection of feelings from a person in one's past to another in the present.
This was used to find out more about conscious conflicts, impulses, and motives.
Argued that dreams are underlying thoughts and memories, the general psychic undercurrents of our lives trying to make themselves known. He believed that asking patients to talk about their dreams and then interpreting the symbols that they discuss was the key to curing patients of their psychological ailments.
And transference.
Transference is one of the most important and intriguing concepts in psychology. It refers to the unconscious redirection of feelings from a person in one's past to another in the present.
This was used to find out more about conscious conflicts, impulses, and motives.
Transference is one of the most important and intriguing concepts in psychology. It refers to the unconscious redirection of feelings from a person in one's past to another in the present.
This was used to find out more about conscious conflicts, impulses, and motives.
Transference is one of the most important and intriguing concepts in psychology. It refers to the unconscious redirection of feelings from a person in one's past to another in the present.
This was used to find out more about conscious conflicts, impulses, and motives. After Sigmund's dad passed, it pushed his studies further. He used himself as a test subject, all on the idea of what motivates humans to either behave constructively or deconstructively to a result of their consciousness or subconscious motivation towards the satisfaction of two innate drives, sex and aggression.
On the Mosaic law, but whether you reject the Mosaic law, do you reject, for instance, monogamy? Do you reject the notion of sexual continence before marriage? Yourself, that is to say, you as a philosopher of the new ideal of sexual liberation.
Well, I think what it really comes down to is an attempt to establish a what's been called a new morality. And I really think that's what the American, this thing called the American sexual revolution is really all about. It's an attempt to replace the old legalism. It's certainly not a rejection of monogamy as such, but very much an attempt, in the case of premarital sex, there really hasn't been any moral code in the past except simply a thou shalt not. And
that's a code, isn't it?
Well, perhaps. I don't think it's a very realistic one.
Now, by 1960, the sexual revolution had begun, which challenged traditional codes of behavior related to sexuality and interpersonal relationships. It was a social movement that increased the acceptance of sex outside of traditional heterosexual couples, marriage, monogamy, same-sex relationships, premarital sex, the pill, public nudity, alternative forms of sex, and the legalization of abortion.
Well, we'll start this morning with some excerpts from an article published on December 22nd, 2003 in Newsweek magazine. The article is entitled Iraqi Vice. Quote, before the invasion, Iraq was one of the world's most tightly controlled societies. Now Iraqis are making up for what they've missed. And many other Iraqis, young and old, are blaming America. Some people say the spread of such things is designed to weaken our society, says Colonel Daoud Salman, a police chief in one of Baghdad's roughest districts. A third of the country's population is estimated to have access to filthy TV channels via satellite dish. For those who don't, enterprising dealers record the footage on video discs and sell them for a pittance. Under Saddam, this would have been an automatic 6 months in jail, says a vendor who keeps ultra-filthy wares in a drawer for special customers at his video shop in Baghdad's Karada district. Now, nothing will happen to us. The regime's vice laws remain on the books, but they're rarely enforced. Immediately after the war, we started raids, and arresting promoters and purveyors, says Lieutenant Colonel Omar Zaid, a top Iraqi cop. But the American MPs made us release them. After that, the promoters and purveyors understood they had nothing to fear. Most Iraqis say they don't know what to do about the Vice explosion. Close quotes. Okay, let's just pause for a few moments and ask ourselves a few questions. Under Saddam, this type of material was not available. But under American occupation, it immediately became available. Isn't the name of this war Operation Iraqi Freedom? Does freedom mean having essentially unlimited access to the most vile kinds of filth? Is that freedom? Is being basted in filth one of the hallmarks of a free society?
Pushing obscenities through television. Now that's very interesting. When you look back in 1962, America had an organization by the name of Morality in Media, or MEM. Now this organization was put in place in New York to raise awareness on the harm